Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Amasika Niaku. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to today's special population seminar. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce you to my friends and colleagues who will be discussing engaging underserved communities in clinical trials. So we have three presenters, so I want to give you the background for all three up front. First, I'm going to start with Dr. Swaminathan. Dr. Shobha Swaminathan is an associate professor of medicine, director of HIV programs, and the clinical research site leader for the Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School Clinical Research Site, also known as Research with a Heart. And so this is a National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases funded clinical trials unit here at NJMS. Dr. Swaminathan is the principal investigator of many grants that provide HIV testing, care, and treatment. Her research interests include clinical trials for HIV treatment and prevention, and she's the site principal investigator for numerous COVID-19 studies, including the pivotal phase 3 Moderna COVID-19 vaccine study. She also leads a very active community engagement team that is dedicated to increasing awareness about HIV and the importance of clinical research in helping to address the HIV epidemic. Now I'll give you a little bit of info about Ms. Christie Lyn Costanza. So she is the Associate Director of Clinical Research Operations for Research with a Heart. Throughout her years of service at our clinical research site, she has grown in all areas of clinical research, from data management, protocol implementation, community engagement, and administration to research nursing, mentoring, and leadership. Christie Lyn's primary responsibilities involve strategic planning, program development, and maintaining organizational effectiveness. She continues to be out there on the ground and in the community with her team for both study visit support and community engagement activities. And then the third member of, or the third presenter, who hopefully will be able to join us towards the end, is Mr. Jamir Tuten, our community engagement coordinator. Jamir has spent the last several years transforming our community engagement programming and crafting our clinical research site into a culturally diverse space. Jamir has single-handedly developed the Research with a Heart social media presence, as well as cultivated our educational programs and community-focused events with the intent to help resolve the research stigma that exists in and around the Newark area. So Jamir has become a trusted leader for LGBTQ+ groups, underserved populations, and for education, promoting health and wellness. And he's nationally recognized for this work. As a testament to that, one of the reasons why he'll be joining us towards the end of the discussion is because he's currently finishing up chairing a community engagement program that's focused on around community engagement for the HIV vaccine trial. So now that introductions are done, please feel free to place your questions in the chat as we go along. We'll make sure that we'll have time for questions at the end. And with that, I'll turn that over to you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Thank you so much, Georgette and Dr. Niaku, for inviting us to present at this panel. What we hope to accomplish today is give you all a little flavor of the type of work that we are doing and a glimpse into how we have approached community engagement in our, for our population. Because as you know, there is no one answer and there is no one right answer for everyone. We each have to figure out the best way forward for what feels right and is right for our own community. So as part of the seminar, we hope to give you an overview of the HIV and COVID-19 clinical trials conducted here at Research with a Heart, discuss the importance of strategic community engagement in successful implementation of these. And COVID-19 has really changed the clinical trial implementation landscape. So we'll talk through some of the successes and challenges that our site has had to deal with during the pandemic. Next. The mission is to provide access to equitable and inclusive research opportunities through community collaboration and effective engagement. So who are we? Our research unit has been established as an NIH-funded site. We've been in business since 2005, and apologies for the alphabet soup of all our funding sources, but Essentially, we are predominantly funded by the National Institutes of Health through the Division of AIDS, to be an ACTG, which stands for AIDS Clinical Trials Group, HPTN, which is the prevention arm or HIV Prevention Trials Network. And in the past 2 years, we've been a co-VPN site or Coronavirus Prevention Network. Yes, we also do some other pharmaceutical industry-sponsored clinical trials. And we couldn't do all the work that we do without our really diverse and dynamic team that have now we've expanded to 2 locations, not just at 140 Bergen, but we are also at the International Center for Public Health. And one of the keys to the success of our program has really been our ability to integrate with the clinical operations or the Rutgers infectious diseases practice that really helps people seamlessly go through from clinical care to research without separations. And as a result of this close collaboration, we have in the past close to 15 years, successfully enrolled over 2,000 participants with a retention record of over 90% in various clinical trials that impact persons living with and at risk for HIV infection, COVID-19, opiate use disorders, and and so many more. Next. So while there have been many clinical trials, I just want to highlight some of the key studies that have really had a huge impact on our populations, not just in this area, but globally. A SMART study, which was the first study that we had as a unit, looked at persons with HIV infection to look at optimal timing of antiretroviral therapy. And that evolved into START study that has established affirmatively the role that persons living with HIV need to be started on medications to treat HIV infection, regardless of their T-cell count. We also looked at multiple other studies, such as the option studies, trying to find novel and new therapeutics for persons living with HIV infections who had failed multiple other treatment options. Our first foray into the world of HIV prevention research was HPTN 064, where we recruited about 420 vulnerable women at risk for HIV infection and followed them over time to identify HIV incidents over a course of a year. And most recently, HPTN 083 Give Pepper Shot, well, we helped bring to market the first injectable medication, cabotegravir, as a prevention medication for persons at risk for HIV infection. So what are some of the other work that's ongoing right now? And this is just, I'm not going to get into some of the slides because you can read that better than I can, but we have multiple ongoing clinical trials where we have been effectively able to leverage collaboration with the Rutgers infectious diseases practice to look at novel injectable medications for persons living with HIV, a new phase 1 clinical trial looking at triphasic monoclonal antibodies for HIV control, Beehive looking at a new hepatitis B vaccine and vaccine responses among persons living with HIV infection. And lastly, Reprieve study, which was a huge study with over 5,000 participants, looking at the role of statins as primary prevention for persons with HIV with respect to cardiovascular risk. And all of this has really hinged on us being able to work with our practice. And since we are talking about engaging minority populations, how have we really been done? And this is kind of a snapshot of all the sites within the US that are parts of the AIDS clinical trials group. And the arrow shows the site that our site number is 31786 and shows the most recent reporting period as of February in the past 12 months where we stood. The graph in the top shows the percent enrollment of women, which as you can see, our site enrolled about 63%. And on the second half is percent enrollment of minority participants. And you can see how our site compares to all the other sites in the continental US. So what are some of the other ongoing HIV prevention studies? The AMP study, which stands for antibody-mediated prevention, has paved the way for a new avenue for HIV prevention. The AMP study looked at the role of monoclonal antibodies or passive immunity to prevent new HIV infections among persons at risk for HIV infections. Additionally, we currently are following participants in one of the phase 3 HIV vaccine studies for HIV prevention, also the Mosaico study, and the Empower 022 looking at a novel once-a-month oral NRTTI islatravir for HIV prevention compared to a daily PrEP. And retention and recruitment in these studies has really been linked heavily, and we really leverage our community engagement. And that has been driven by our numerous needs assessments and social media campaigns, which have been really critical, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic. Next. And this provides a snapshot of how we have done in our key HIV prevention studies, in particularly the AMP and HPTN 083, which are two of the largest HIV prevention studies that conducted at our site to date. As you can see, 70% of the population that we enrolled was less than 30 years of age. And this is especially relevant because that group is most vulnerable to acquire new infections. We also enrolled one of the highest numbers of transgender participants at just under 12%. And as you can see, the 67% were Black and almost a third were Hispanic in origin. And this becomes relevant because these are the populations who are at risk and vulnerable to HIV infection. So it's critical that they be reflected in the clinical trials that will ultimately benefit them. Now, additionally, in the past 2 years, we have had to pivot a lot of our work to COVID-19 studies because of the pandemic. And we were one of the sites for Moderna, the phase 3 mRNA 1273 vaccine. In addition to that, we also conducted a large community seroprevalence study, also called the COMPASS study, where we enrolled over 1,000 participants in and around Newark at various community venues. We also conducted clinical trials for COVID prevention using antibodies and COVID therapeutics. And these recruitment and retention successes, which we will talk about a little bit in more detail, really leveraged on a multi-pronged approach that included a lot of virtual programming, but ultimately we were only able to succeed in those clinical trials because of our pre-existing partnerships that existed way before the pandemic and before we started even talking about these studies. Next. So why am I really talking about all of this, and why is this even relevant, and how were we able to accomplish this, particularly given the challenges that we face? So with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to my co-moderator, Christie Lyn Costanza, to talk a little bit about our community engagement activities.
Everybody for being here. I see a lot of old colleagues, current colleagues, and people that I'm very excited to share all this information with. So as Dr. Swaminathan was mentioning, and reviewing all the studies that we've been able to conduct over a decade, if you will, we know underrepresentation in research is not new news. This is something that has been identified. It has been discussed repeatedly. There are numerous articles. There's tons of data around this. And yet we're still struggling as a whole to really engage underrepresented populations. There's snapshots here of some of the articles and some of the conversations that have been shared in different journals. So knowing that this isn't new news, as our site has kind of taken an approach to address this, we've developed some strategic community engagement planning. And this has been really critical for us to be able to have the successes we've had in our enrollment, specifically within the underrepresented populations that we've been able to engage. It becomes even more critical knowing where we are. We are situated in Newark, and we do have one of the highest incidence and prevalence rates of HIV in the state. And we also have since COVID, it has been much more impacted around our area and in our communities as well. So what did we have to do? How does this start? Initially, we really had to meet ourselves where we were, not only personally, but professionally and geographically, to ask ourselves hard questions about our own personal biases, about the way that people see us. How are we seen in the community? How do people think about University Hospital, the campus where we are located? And really acknowledge the gaps. Where are the existing barriers? What are the potential barriers? Being mindful of the historical research traumas. It's impossible to conduct these types of clinical studies in our area without being mindful of what has happened in the past. People carry that with them through generations and generations, and that's what they speak of the first time we interact with them. And it's important to know that so that we can respond not only with compassion, but understanding, and in a way that can fuel building research capacity. Surveying the community has been a challenge in some regard. Not everybody wants to share what they know or their experiences, but we've been able to host a number of needs assessments. We've conducted a few different questionnaires and surveys with our current participants to really get a sense of what their needs are. And even taking a step back from that, being able to identify our community, knowing who we're trying to reach, knowing who we need to serve, knowing who is going to benefit from the projects that we have and these opportunities have been really critical as well. Once we identified our community, engaging those partners. We have a very, very engaged research cab, which we are really lucky to have. Our group is quite active, and they provide us tons of feedback, not only on the studies we're currently doing, the studies we should be doing, and how to best reach people where they are. Taking all that into consideration, it helped us to establish a framework, essentially, and we had to schedule dedicated time to review this and work through these processes to ensure that we were going to be able to sustain our efforts. A piece of our framework obviously involves establishing and defining who the community is. So for us, it was really important to ensure that we weren't only focusing on the target population. We weren't only focusing on the individuals that would potentially be eligible for the studies, right? Because everybody is a part of multiple different communities. So we define our community as not only our external partners, which are local civic leaders, gatekeepers, stakeholders, internal partners throughout Rutgers and on campus across the CRU, participants, whether they had screened, pre-screened, or are currently enrolled or had completed a trial, our geographic location, understanding where we are in Newark, in Essex County, in northern New Jersey, very close to the Metro New York area, and of course our CAB. Using that as a model for who we're trying to reach, we were really able to establish some pillars for community engagement. That way we can ensure that we're not missing any one piece of this larger puzzle. The 4 pillars that we've established are education, recruitment, retention, and support. So these are terms that I'm sure everybody knows, right? Everybody is aware of. How we define these may be a little bit different and how we put them into play at our site to assist with community engagement. So education are really just opportunities to provide information, not only about the research studies and the research process, but it could be about anything that an agency or organization or even some of our participants may express interest in learning more about. The main goal of the education is to raise awareness, provide knowledge, and establish our site as an ally and a resource to the community. And you can see there's just some pictures of flyers from events that we've hosted in the past that really centered just around that goal. In thinking about recruitment, that is exactly what it sounds like. The main goal is enrollment. You want to make sure that you know your target populations and that you can reach them. So these efforts are directed at and curated for those specific groups, whether it's with a flyer or a recruitment actual session that specifically talks only about the study and gives information about that and allows people to pre-screen, or even being present, tabling events, and really looking for individuals who may be interested in joining a study. Retention is a huge element to all of this. A lot of times we say retention starts, and I think everybody, kind of feels this way. Retention starts at your first interaction with a potential client. The first time you say hello and the first time you ask them their name and what they're interested in, that really sets a tone for the duration of your partnership or your relationship with that person. So retention activities are focused on not only maintaining a connection to the site, because you may not be eligible right away, right? There may be a study that you want to join, but you can't due to the eligibility criteria. But potentially down the road, something may come up. So really maintaining that connection after we make a contact, and also engaging throughout the study, engaging that participation, making sure that people can follow the schedule of events for the duration of the trial, and that they're appreciated for their contributions. We have some examples here. We tend to host appreciation dinners at the end of the year. We do send out birthday cards, thank you cards, holiday cards, things like that. Overall, the goal for retention is to foster that sense of community among the participants and even the team. Events are typically informal, or the efforts are informal, and it really does not rely on any study-specific information. Support. So this is one that is probably one of the most important pieces to this larger puzzle. These activities allow us to engage with populations we serve by attending local events without actively recruiting. It really, really comes down to showing up, being there for the communities that we're serving, not only locally, but depending on the population itself, depending on what their needs are. Some examples, I have flyers here, but we've also attended balls, we've attended rallies, we've attended community conversations to help, really fuel new processes, not only for policing in Newark, but for protection of transgender individuals and things like that. And really assuming the role of an ally. It's really putting our efforts into that way where we can have collaborative efforts, foster that larger sense of community, that even though we are researchers, at Rutgers, that we are here in this community and we are part of the community, and we want to make sure that we can contribute to the betterment of the community. It also helps us to remain connected to any cultural shifts or local events. And this was really key, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, as different rallies and anti-vax movements were kind of moving around our area. We had to be ready to respond to that, not only for our clients, but to the larger community. And not in a way of saying, this is wrong, you need to follow this, but in a way to really step back and acknowledge what people are saying, what their concerns are, what information do they need? How can we provide resources that are trusted to ensure people have the information they need to make informed decisions? And that was really, really key. So putting that all together, from engagement to practice, so we have all of those great studies that we do in our location. We are co-located within the infectious diseases practice. We're conducting these assessments, we're engaging with clients. We have this strategy that really works well for our team. And then what happens? We get all this information from people about what they need, what would be best for them, what would be better for the communities. So what do we do with that? One of the things that has been really, really pivotal at our location is our ability to take all of that from engagement and put it into practice. And these are just some examples of what has happened over the last few years as a direct result of hearing, sitting, and listening to what clients need. One of the things we did was establish the RUTH program, which is the Rutgers University Trans Health Program. It's one of the largest in the state. It started with just about 10 people, and now we have well over 100 that are followed in our practice. The Shine Clinic was also established, which allows individuals who are HIV negative or HIV positive to come in for STI treatment and testing as well. And that expanded hours, it really allowed ourselves to provide the community with a need that really just isn't there. Team member capacity building, really looking back, again, as I mentioned before, one of the first steps in all of this work was looking at where we were and where we are. And it's an ongoing process. This is something that doesn't just happen overnight. Not one training will make anybody an expert. This is a consistent sort of initiative for us to have capacity building in our team. And that included safe space training and pronoun initiatives. particularly given the populations we were serving at the time in our largest prevention studies, which were men who have sex with men and trans men and women. One of our greatest successes that was really exciting for us was to establish our own template for our informed consent forms that enabled us to include a line for preferred name. And this was really critical, especially working with our transgender clients, to ensure that they were affirmed when they were reconsenting or initially consenting to a study. So now all of our consents have this as an option. And to be honest, it has triggered a lot of educational moments, a lot of conversation with clients who may not know what that means or why that's there. And overall, it's a true success, and we're very proud of that accomplishment. Lastly, one of the things that we've recognized, especially throughout the COVID pandemic, is that we need to bring research and clinical care to where the community is. COVID-19 certainly put a spotlight on a lot of things that could be improved, that a lot of more challenges that there are in our communities. But one of the things that is highly evident is that we can't always expect people to access us in clinical spaces. And by being able to get out into the community where they are and providing them information and the resources that they need to ensure that they have access to care and equitable care is critical. So we are in the process of launching a mobile unit that will be able to do just that. And this is fantastic. Even during the pandemic, people did express fear in presenting to the clinical sites. And that fear is continued. And so this, again, will be able to bridge that gap and bridge a gap that we identified by moving through these changes, not only in health, but in general, so that we can really meet the needs of the community. So we talked a lot about some of the challenges. Obviously, there's always mistrust when you're dealing with underrepresented populations, lack of comfort with clinical spaces, lack of information about clinical trials, needing more time, really needing time to build relationships is key. It's not always that underrepresented populations are just not going to join research, or they're just not interested, or they don't know. But what we do know and what we have found in some of the research is that they do need more time. And that's okay. But we have to be prepared to support them and be prepared to ensure that we have the information and the tools that they need to really feel comfortable with joining a study. COVID-19 made everything 10 times harder. We were then unable to meet people where they are. And that was one of our biggest successes. We were out in the streets constantly, not only for one-on-one interactions, but tabling at events, collaborating with local agencies for hosting community events, and it just was not able to happen. The fear of the unknown was just remarkable in a sense, the way that it impacted our communities. The lack of immediate support infrastructure was very evident, and we know that that's still going to be an ongoing situation and always evolving so that we can be ready for the next situation that may cause something like COVID-19. Large gaps in services. Agencies were closed, doors were closed almost without notice. There was a lack of communication. A lot of agencies don't have digital communications, or a lot of the clients don't have access to digital communications. And so then it left people kind of in limbo about what to do and where to get access to care. We also had reduced access to our clinical site due to institutional restrictions. And then financial burdens increased, of course, particularly in our area and within our communities. Access to housing, access to food, as well as just protective equipment. And isolation wasn't always an option for people who have multi-generational households or just different lifestyles where they couldn't be alone and they had to be around people. So all of this happened while we were still trying to not only engage our current clients, which we were following over 200 individuals on a variety of studies, many with investigational products, but then met with the increasing demand to recruit and enroll in COVID-19 studies. So how did we handle that? I have to say that for us, in thinking about our engagement success during the pandemic, particularly in our populations local to this area, underrepresented populations, most of the trials were looking for underrepresented populations to join these trials, and they wanted them to enroll immediately. So what we really had to do, not only for the studies, but for ourselves and to show support for our community, was take a step back. And having that structure, having our work plan, having our strategic engagement plan really provided us the roadmap to be able to continue to be successful, to continue to be flexible, looking at what our plans were, and then how we can modify them, whether to be virtual sessions or put things off the table, have new ideas, be more creative in our efforts to not only reach out to our current clients, but how are we going to reach the broader communities for these new studies that we are trying to enroll into? And how could we give people information? In the beginning, everybody needed information, and it was hard to sift through. It's still hard to sift through. Leveraging and expanding our social media presence was also a huge, huge benefit. We had an established Facebook and Instagram page and Twitter, but through the pandemic, we were able to leverage it in a whole new way, not only providing information, but we also provided weekly updates at one point about COVID-19 and what the guidance was as it was ever changing. We collaborated nationally for a number of events that focused on conspiracies and myths around COVID-19 and really opened up our partnerships, to focus with faith-based communities and really trying to hit home where we could for the communities that we need to serve. The continued investment was key. We never stopped listening, learning, and responding to the community. And this was critical for us in our development of the events and also having some in-person testing events. One of the things that was really challenging in the beginning was that people could not get a COVID test and they couldn't get it for free. And we were able to secure a grant that was able to provide that service. And we were able to host we did some weekend events also for testing, and that was something that the community really needed. Although it wasn't directly recruitment related, it certainly helped give people exposure to the studies that we had available and to get information that they really needed at the time. Meeting the needs, understanding that people couldn't get to the clinic, understanding that we still had people we had to follow on investigational products. We were able to secure approval to deliver study medications, some study products to people's homes, moving to virtual visits and telephone visits, and ensuring that our space was equipped not only with PPE for us and that our team was protected, but that we had extras for our clients as they come in, which was really critical. And as always, answering hard questions with transparency, honesty, and compassion. If we don't know the answer, we aren't going to just tell you something. Our physicians, Dr. Swaminathan, Dr. Nyaku, everyone here at the clinic was readily available when people had lots of questions and were really concerned not only for themselves, but for their family. And taking into consideration the collective experience of the team, which was a challenge, knowing that we were all coming to work, we're all dealing with the pandemic, and we're all actively trying to focus on our communities. But really pulling that into the fold has helped us not only serve the community, but help support our team as well.
Thank you, Christie Lyn. And, while we can certainly go, talk, at length about many things that we have discussed, at the end of the day, what we want to really emphasize, at least what has worked for us, is to really knowing the community, and that, the community is diverse and forever changing. What was true 10 years ago may not be true 5 years ago, may not be true now. Communities change, it evolves. So really knowing and having a pulse in the community is really critical. Engaging them, sometimes, and I'm just as guilty as other researchers, and think, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I'm going to do. But it actually helped to just talk to the community, engage them, and ask them what they need. Because when you ask them, they usually will tell you what they need, and what they know better than anybody else, what really is the most critical thing. Because when I, as clinician, primarily I see myself as a clinician and clinician researcher, we talk about medications and adherence, particularly if a person is living with HIV. But if they don't have access to basic social system and social support like food and shelter, taking medication is not going to be that critical, because at the end of the day, they need to have a safe place to live and food to eat and clothes, and involving them in an ongoing partnership. So having an active consumer advisory board has really been, extremely helpful for us, within the research and within our clinical programs, because our CAB will tell us, this is what is bothering us. We need you to do X, Y, and Z. Many of our clinical trial participants, when we were engaging with them, we realized that while we were recruiting for many of the HIV prevention studies, they had a lot of unmet needs. They have mental health needs, substance use needs. They didn't have a place to go for gender-affirming hormone care, for other preventive services. And therefore we used those needs that were identified and implemented them into clinical care, which had nothing to do with research, but it really went into our community engagement, because it was important to us to let our community know that we heard what they had to say and wanted to do whatever it took to make that happen. While the use of gender pronouns, the correct use of pronouns, it's shocking to me that until 5 years ago that we didn't think about it before that. All I can say is that, when our participants talked to us and communicated those, as we reflected on those and tried to implement concrete changes that impacted real people that live in the real community. So with that, we are at the end of our presentation. Please follow us on our social media tag. And I'm very happy to say that our co-moderator, Jamir Tuten, has been able to join us, and we'd be happy to take questions that any of you may have for all of us here. So while we're waiting for questions, Jamir, I'm sorry you missed. I'm so glad you were able to join. Do you want to add? Do you want to say something?
Hi, I'm so sorry I got on late. I'm still in the midst of one of the network Zooms that I had to facilitate a talk on, but I'm a great multitasker, and I did not want to miss my team giving this wonderful talk. Christie Lyn, Dr. Swaminathan, you did an amazing job. And I would just underscore the need to be authentic in your engagement strategies, be genuine in your needs assessments, and take the feedback that you get from the community very seriously. We did not just become Rutgers and JMS Research with the Heart because we did what we thought made sense, but we did a lot of the things that we felt we had to do based on the correspondence with the community, the needs assessments, us taking the time to not only say, hey, we'd really like you to engage with us in terms of this clinical trial, but also underscoring the education around research and being able to explain stigma. And a lot of the times it's just meeting people where they are and being able to not only just ask them for something, but offer them resources and other things as well. So great job, everyone. And I will be happy to answer questions as well. And social media is really important. Shout out to Research with the Heart social media. Follow us. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Research with the Heart. We're also on Twitter, RWAH Nork. And we have a YouTube channel that you can view wonderful videos from various talks and events that we've hosted in your free time.
Monica, you had a question that you had put in the chat. Would it be possible for you and Jamir to discuss that so everyone has an opportunity to learn from it?
Yes. So Monica had mentioned how it can be challenging when it comes to technology and the overall, some of the community members' literacy in terms of that. And that's really important to acknowledge. We cannot assume that everyone knows how to use Zoom or is comfortable with being on a virtual meeting or comfortable communicating through social media. We were just out in the community yesterday, and it was kind of shocking But one of the students that we were talking to said that they didn't have any social media to be able to connect with. And I don't even believe the person had a smartphone. So luckily we were prepared. And although we have digital forms and ways that we capture people's information, we also make sure that we carry paper materials as well, so that people can write things down, and so that we don't appear to be exclusionary in terms of how we are communicating with people in the community. So that's something really important to think about. And it's something that we did not know we had to think about until the onset of the pandemic. So that was a really great point, Monica. Thank you so much for that.
I have
Any
some
other
questions in the chat. Yes, Jamir, I had some questions in the chat in relation to who develops our flyers and our artwork, and how do we cover things, how are we able to implement the Ruth program and the Shine Clinic? So I don't know if you want to address who makes the flyers and our materials.
Yes, thank you for whoever asked the question. Thank you for noticing. It is definitely a collaborative event. In the beginning, a lot of it was me, but we have a wonderful community engagement team, which consists of Andrew and Jesse, who are on the other call that we have right now. And they work really hard in terms of, looking at the things that we post and deciding what themes works well with the messages that we're trying to put forth, and really just being able to have an overall engagement strategy that makes sense towards the goals that we have, whether it's related to an actual study recruitment flyer, whether it's related to retention, whether it is related, thanks Lisa, I see you, whether it's related to an event that we're hosting. You don't want to really put out a flyer that isn't married to your mission, your vision, and your values, and it doesn't look like it belongs in tandem with your programming and the themes in which you've developed. Social media is a lot of work, and it's a whole talk in itself that we could talk about in terms of the strategies and the ways to implement your social media presence into the community. But flyers, content, and the messages that you put out into the community matters, and it all comes from us. You would think that we use a graphic designer, but we use this wonderful tool called Canva. If you do not know what it is, canva.com. It's really, really great. And we bounce ideas and things off of each other. I know Christie Lyn and I can sit for hours and, edit a flyer and go back and forth about the title, the caps, the what stands out, what doesn't, the colors. All those things really matters because you really only have a few seconds to capture someone's attention. So that's really important. Thank you, Lisa.
Let's talk about, what are timelines that the Research with the Heart has developed and modified over time, not only in terms of how to maintain longitudinal relationships with communities that we're serving and asking to participate in research, but also thinking about this process of how do we support other organizations so that visibility isn't only, that we're taking, but also that we're giving. How has that process gone over time? And if others can talk about, what they're planning or have been instituting in place for their programs and put that in the chat, that'll be informative for others that are on the seminar.
Thank you for that, Masika. Also, I know that there were some questions about, will there be a recording of this session and will that be available? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And we will have it available in approximately 2 weeks on the Special Populations website, which is on RBHS and NJAX. So again, thank you all so much for being here. Do we have any other questions, and especially to our presenters who were amazing? So thank you all so much.
Hi. How do you handle, and you may have mentioned this, so I apologize if I missed it, but how do you handle pushback from the community around getting involved? A lot of, different groups have their own historical reasons for not being involved. And certainly we think about the times we're in now, and now how they start thinking about, in what way will this benefit them, not only personally, right, individually by going through the study, but also as a community, as a collective, right? So, how do you work with, I guess somebody mentioned timelines, right? In terms of like the pushback that you might get, and still addressing their concerns with care, compassion, and empathy, so that it feels like this is a relationship and not a one-off. Just because we need people in the study, we're coming to you.
So I think that's a really great question, and thank you for that. And I think it also piggybacks on a question that just came through the chat. It's hard to say what the timelines are. And I know to think about that, I think the most important thing is it has to be consistent and deliberate as far as it relates to us addressing the community and thinking of how we've defined the community. So kind of thinking back to the slides and how there's so many layers. It's not just a focus on one group at one time for one study. And we've done that before, and it's come back to bite us. So we had to readjust how we approach our work, and it sometimes takes years. We've had people that have engaged with us out in the field, and we're like, absolutely not. Don't even come near me with this research business. And then 4 years later, they're like, okay, I'll screen. I'll see if this works. You've been around a while. I trust you now, because we haven't left. And we really do, I think the key is to be aware of that. It's that you need to take the time to dedicate, to be deliberate, to have concerted efforts around community engagement. And it may not be, capable at every place. You may not have the funding support for staff to do that, but at least acknowledging that and ensuring that that's continued, whether it's just within your clinical teams or just within your support staff, that somewhere, some piece of you is consistent and deliberate, is critical. The pushback, we just meet them where they are. We really want to find out more about what's driving the pushback so that if we have resources or information, then we can share that. It's not so much about convincing or trying to change anyone's mind at all. It's really just enabling them to have all the tools to still make their informed decision, which might still be a no, and that's okay. Jamir, I know you had unmuted quickly. I don't know if you want to jump in.
Sorry, I'm like Zoom multitasking. But I definitely think those things are important. And there was a comment in the chat about building trust seems like one of the first steps in the timeline of community and community connection. Nicole, that's 100% right. That's where you should start if you are looking to have a successful long-term relationship with your communities. I talk to people all the time, and some of the questions that people ask me is like, well, how many people do you get from every event or every Facebook post or every this? And a lot of the times, those initiatives and efforts do not result in direct recruitment, but they do result in brand recognition. They do result in community building and partnerships, and kind of helping sustain the foundation of our place here in this community, so that over time, those people who may have said, well, who are they, will start to say, oh, they're those people who do this. And then over time, it's no, they're those people who do X, Y, and Z, because that has been clarified. And then next thing you know, there's a need that needs to be met. And then they think of you and your organization and the resources that you have. So building trust, relationships, and partnerships, key to community engagement.
Right. And to really going back to Monica, your question is, I think one of the first step is also recognizing, right, the reasons why people give pushback. I mean, it's not without reason. That fear has kept people safe, in the past, because, there has been Tuskegee, we have not, the scientific community has made a lot of mistakes. I mean, yes, we have changed now because there's multiple new safeguards in place, but the first step is really recognizing and validating their fear and concern. And as they both said, meeting them where they are and building a relationship of trust. And going back to one of the questions, the chat box that said about, how do you convince a participant to enroll in a trial for a condition for which there's an approved medication? I want to step back and say we never convince people to do anything. It's really, I see our role is to provide people the choice and the option and educate them. And I'll use HIV prevention as an example. So for HIV prevention, up until January, we had just 2 medications approved, and they both require taking a pill, 1 pill every day to prevent HIV infection. So when we've talked to participants, we've given that information. We have been transparent. You want to tell them what is the current standard of care, what is approved, and if that works for you, that's great. But if that doesn't work for you, because despite the availability of that medication for, at this point, almost 10 years, we continue to have so many new infections. So we are looking to help find, solutions that will help everyone. And if you feel like you want to be part of that, either be that an injection every other month or a pill that you take once a month, giving the preliminary data, knowing that, again, as a participant, there is no guarantee that it will work, but these are the safeguards we have in place for you. And if you want to reflect on that, that's great. But it's really giving them an education. And if you don't want to participate in a clinical trial, that's great. This is where you can go to access clinical care. Because just because you don't want to participate in a trial, it doesn't mean that our engagement with you ends there. We just, hand you off to the clinical care so you can continue to seek and access to care, because there are many. We have reached hundreds of participants. Only a minority have actually enrolled in clinical trials, but we continue to engage with them because of the other services that our team does refer them out to, because we are there sometimes as a bridge to help them come to the healthcare system and access care that they need so desperately.
Thank you for that. I really appreciated the comments. And I agree, it is about building that knowledge. Even if they're not enrolled in a trial or not going to participate in the trial, just building that knowledge and understanding around, what it means to be involved, and how we continue this relationship building, as Jamir said, and building that trust with one another. And I appreciated the pillars, as a model to kind of really look at engagement from that perspective, because it shows intentionality there and a willfulness of really looking at the relationship and not just the outcome of that relationship.
Yes, thank you.
And so we're at the top of the hour, and I just want to again give a round of applause to our fantastic presenters and also to the audience. Thank you for remaining on and engaged and working with us through some of this weirdness that sometimes happens with Zoom. And as always, we're happy to, have everybody kind of reach out and, build collaborations and provide further lessons learned. As Jamir talked about, you can reach out to find more about how to launch a successful social media program to help support your activities. But thank you, Dr. Swaminathan, Christie Lyn, Jamir, and again, everybody for joining today.